Good morning, Brother Chad Long here from Delhi Baptist Church. Happy to meet with you again in the book of Hebrews. We have, I believe, finished in verse 16, which I will reread. But we've been looking at the faith chapter. We've been looking at the examples of faith. I would call this the Faith Hall of Fame. Many of our sports teams have established a Hall of Fame somewhere. I know in football it's in Canton, Ohio. I don't know where it is in baseball. Probably around New York somewhere. I don't know, but most of your sports teams, if not all of them, like to remember those who have done just amazing and outstanding things. Well, our Father God is no different. He recognizes the importance of faith in His people, and He records it, I believe. I think that the things that we do in faith are going to be rewarded by the Lord, and I think that the more that we exhibit faith, the better He can bless us and honor us. I think He just only ever wanted us to trust Him, and I think about children, Well, quick example, when we would go swimming, sometimes we would take not just our kids, but some of their friends. And I remember at one point taking some friends. In fact, we brought them to church. They stayed part of one summer with us. When we got out to the water, all of my children trusted me in the water because I taught them to swim. All but the youngest daughter, I've taught to swim, and she's we had a pool. I say had. We still have it. We just haven't moved it to Delhi. Anyway, I don't know if or when we will. It's a lot of work. But we had a really large above-ground pool, the biggest you could buy at the time, professionally installed, not a Walmart pool. I'm talking about a professionally installed. But anyway, I taught all my kids to swim in it. They all trust me. I put them in the water. I show them what I want them to do. They do it. They learn to swim. They know if I've got my hands on them that they're okay. Well, our friend Robin left some kids with us a couple summers ago. The summer before COVID, I guess it was. And when we got out to the water, two of her kids knew how to swim, but one of her sons, his name happens to be Caleb, but I mean, we're not using last names on here, so it's not a big deal. He was just scared, terrified of the water. He didn't trust me, he didn't trust the water, and he didn't want to be there. Well, it was kind of, upsetting for everybody else. They wanted to be there. So it took me a while, half a day anyway, to finally get him to trust me enough to show him in the shallow areas, that the water wouldn't hurt him and that I wouldn't let him go under and drown. So anyhow, I just think about the fact that if my children can trust me, God's children should be able to trust Him so much more. Because I could slip and fall or drown myself. Their trust in me is amazing because it's misplaced. I can fail them. Our trust in God is not. It is sure. It is secure. So anyway, verse 16 says of Hebrews 11, "But now they desire a better country, that is, an heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He hath prepared for them a city." Because He is our God, and because we know that He's prepared these things for us, we can continue on in faith, trusting, serving, and honoring Him, knowing there's a place where we will be with Him for all eternity. Verse 17 says, "By faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promise offered up his only begotten son." There's quite a bit here, actually. First of all, when we say only begotten son, you're going to argue and say, well, Abraham had lots of kids. And he did later in life. At the time that this took place, there were only two, and only one that was promised of God. If you were to turn to Genesis 22, you would notice in verse 2, well, I'll read 1 and 2. "It came to pass after these things, God did tempt," better word is test. That's the word we get in Hebrews. If you look back at Hebrews 11 and 17, he says when he was tried, tested, not necessarily tempted, but same idea. Came to pass after these things, God did tempt Abraham, tried him, tested him, and said to him, Abraham, he said, here I am. Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac. Now we recognize he had another son, but there's only one son there at the time. This was after Ishmael had been asked to, his mother had been asked to leave. Ishmael was left with him. So Isaac's the only son in two regards. One, he's the only one there. Two, he's the only one that was promised of God. I recognize Abraham had lots of kids after this, and I recognize he had literally two sons before this. But there's only one there, and there's only one that was promised. So when you read that in Hebrews chapter 11, don't panic at that. That's consistent because it says the same thing in Genesis 22. Secondly, when it says he offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son. God didn't ask for him to do anything until he had first been faithful to him and gave him, kept his word to him and did what he said he would do. What do you mean by that, Chad? Well, from early on in Abraham's life, from the traveling of Ur to Haran, then after the death of his father, from the traveling of Haran all the way to Canaan, as it was known at the time, God has kept his promise all the way. When they left Ur, Abraham couldn't know where he would end up for sure. And he couldn't know if he'd make it or if he'd die out there somewhere. He couldn't possibly know. He took a young Sarah and they took off. And they trusted the Lord, and the Lord was faithful. The Lord gave them a home, and he gave them possessions and what we would call today money, but currency of all different sorts. He made him wealthy and powerful and respected, and he had kept his promise. In addition to that, he had promised him a son. Abraham had gone out on his own and tried to fulfill that promise, but God had fulfilled it himself. So after having received all these promises, then and only then does God ask us to take from the promises we have received and be willing to sacrifice back for him. Now, this is only asked of mature Christians. I've never seen God expect a baby Christian to have to sacrifice anything. I've never seen that. I don't believe that happens. But if you're an older, mature Christian and you know that all things are the Lord's and you've developed a trust and a faith in him, he may ask some things of you. We've had to exhibit our faith out in Delhi for over the past year. We've had to exhibit it. Not enough to say we have faith. We've had to show it. Scary, still is. But we've been able to exhibit our faith in God by trusting in him and him alone for the health and wellness of our entire church body and honestly our community. It's not likely that we've not encountered anybody with something they could give us. It's more likely God has protected us. And that's what I believe has happened. Enough about that. Verse 18, of whom it was said, it's talking about this begotten Isaac, of whom it was said, that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Let me read that again because I confused myself. He that had received the promises is Abraham, offered up his only son, of whom, he's talking about Abraham, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. I think Abraham recognized that whatever God decided to do was ultimately up to him and that he could restore it any way that he wanted to. I don't think Abraham expected Isaac to be spared slaying. I think that I honestly believe, and you're going to ask me why I believe this after I say it, so let me go ahead and just preface it with this. if you're walking with God and talking with God and you've got a good relationship with Him, He'll reveal things to you. I know that because He's revealed them to me. Now, I'm not all-knowing, and there's a lot I don't understand, but He reveals things to me. And I believe that in some form or fashion, the coming Messiah and the gospel of it was revealed to Abraham in tidbits. I think he understood pieces and parts of it because there was a picture of it all the way from the Garden of Eden on. There's been a picture of a sacrifice needing to be made and a Messiah needing to have suffered for our sin and needing to have died for that sin and needing to have been resurrected for that sin. So if you understand that, you may not understand how it's all going to happen, but if you understand that and the Lord comes along and says, I need you to sacrifice that boy in, my only question would have been, Lord, is he worthy of that? I would have expected your Messiah to be completely sinless, and that boy's an idiot. He messes up all the time. I mean, I'm kidding, but seriously, that would have been my only question here. But I think Abraham had some knowledge of what God was going to do in the future, and so when this picture and type of it comes, while I'm sure it troubled him, he was able to do it. I also want you to know that this happens at a particular time in Abraham's faith when he can bear it. I don't think God would have asked it of him when the boy was born. I don't think he would have asked it of him when he was relatively young. I think Isaac by this point is grown. Some have even suggested he may have been 33 years old. I'm not saying that's true. It would be a better picture of Jesus if it were, but I'm not saying he was 33. I just don't believe he was a teenager. I think he was at least 20, 21, 22, 23. I don't think he was a little boy anymore. He's a man. He's a young man. Trusts his father. And he's needing to be offered as a sacrifice. Not given, but offered. That was really the only point. He says, verse 19 says that, Abraham accounted that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. That verse means the way he received him to start with was from a couple of old dead bodies in a type, in a form, in a figure. Isaac was given out of a place of death, out of a couple of would-be corpses. I mean, I'm not trying to be graphic or gross. I'm just saying the fact that Isaac was given in the first place was a miracle, and Abraham understood that. And so he had to think, and the Bible tells us that he accounted that God would be able to raise him. If he allowed him to die, he'd also allow that he could bring him back. So that was by faith. All of that was by faith. Verse 20, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. Isaac, having learned faith from his father, continues in that faith by trusting what God promised he'd do beyond himself through Jacob and Esau, who both become great nations. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel and gave commandment concerning his bones. We're going to stop there because I don't want to get into Moses yet. But the picture is the same. Passed down from father to son is a pattern of faith. And all of that faith was best exhibited toward the end of the life of the patriarch. It was toward the end of the life of Abraham when his faith is mentioned with the example given of Isaac. It was at the end of Isaac's life, or not at the end, but closer to the end than the beginning, when he blessed his two sons. And I know there was that whole mix-up of them two, and there was some things he did that you could argue about, but either way, he trusted God and had faith that God would be faithful to his promise. Is the reason he did it. It's also why there's not a lot said about Isaac here. It kind of skips right over him. Goes to Jacob. Jacob, who blessed all his children at the end of his life, and then Joseph, who before he died, who trusted the Lord to fulfill another promise as he had always done in Joseph's life. But again, all of these examples are given toward the latter end of these men's lives when they're old enough to be faithful and true to God. and to trust everything that they've learned of him. I can tell you that the older I get, the more trust and faith I have in him. And I am to the point where I can say with all assurity, everything I have, from my family to the last dollar in my account to that old Ford that I drive, everything I have is his. And he may take it at any point he wishes. And I will sacrifice anything I've got to the Lord because it's not mine anyway. And he has been faithful to me. And there's nothing he can take from me that I wouldn't willingly give him. Now, I haven't always been there, but I believe I'm there now, or I'm trying to be. There's little things I need to do better. There's little things I need to clean up. And so if you wanted to make the argument that I haven't been able to surrender every aspect of my personality, well, I will agree to that. But as far as anything he's given me, I would definitely give it back. All right, well, that's all the time we have. I hope that what you're getting out of this is that we grow in faith and we become more faithful as we grow, and we're able to give back to our God who has given so much for us. And it's not that he needs any of these things. God does not need any of our sacrifices, any of our gifts. He just desires that we're willing to give it. It's not a need. And it's more for our benefit than his. He can do so much more in us, through us, for us when we get to that point. So I hope that your faith is strong. And if it's weak in any area, I hope you'll pray about it and work on it, as I will do the same. And I hope you have a good weekend. Look forward to seeing you either in church or back here come Monday. God bless you.